Hello everyone, I'm David Webb from Acas. Acas is an independent and impartial organisation helping employers and employees with advice about running the workplace. Acas has a website that can help give you advice. It runs training courses, and it also has special advisors that can come into your organisation or business to help you on a one-to-one basis with any problems you may have. Today, Chris and I, Chris will introduce himself in a moment, are here to talk about one particular topic, and that's preventing age discrimination in the workplace. What I should add is that we won't be able to deal with any sort of particular individual cases. We're talking about preventing age discrimination generally. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, David. Yes, my name's Chris Ball, and I'm a researcher at Newcastle University and also the Centre for Research into the Older Workforce, which is an independent think tank research organisation associated with Newcastle and Hull universities. So I've been working in this field of the ageing workforce now for about 12 years. Before that, I was a trade union official. Before that, I did various things, including teaching physics. This is an area that is of great interest to me, partly because I'm an employment expert, but also because I've had a growing interest in age as I guess I've grown a little older and begun to realise just how important it is in terms of working in later life and that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. One thing I should point out early on is that Acas has just produced new guidance on preventing age discrimination at work, which can be found on the Acas website at www.acas.org.uk/age discrimination. But Chris and I are here to talk about some of the main issues concerning preventing age discrimination. And so we'll start with a question. We've got one that's asking us, how is age discrimination most likely to happen at work? I think I'll start off by pointing out that it needs to be understood that age discrimination, or preventing it, is about stopping employees and job applicants being treated unfairly because of their age. It's against the law. There are a few very limited exceptions where it's allowed, but in most cases it's against the law. And it's about sort of not treating people unfairly regardless of their age. It's not just about the young and the old. And the protection can also work in various ways. It can include because an individual is treated unfairly because of their age. It can be because that person is thought to be a particular age. It can be because that person is treated unfairly because they're linked with somebody of a particular age. And it can also work in that they must not be the sort of target of harassment, things like bullying, because of their age. Is there anything that you would sort of like to add there, Chris?
Well, I'm sure that there's lots that will come out, but I think it's often the case that we are very sloppy with our language, and we tend to take a bit of an easy come, easy go attitude towards banter and that sort of thing, without necessarily realising that one person's banter is another person's potential harassment or certainly unfair treatment, and can cause offence. So we have to be careful about the way that we speak to people. We have to be careful about the assumptions that we make. We often make really simplistic assumptions about what people can do or can't do, or what they're suitable for or maybe not suitable for because of their age. And these are things that I think are probably present in most of us some of the time. And we need to examine our own assumptions, and we need to be very careful about falling prey to what psychologists refer to as unconscious bias.
Yes.
So it's an easy thing to do. Often it's because people are a bit lazy, actually. It's so much easier to put people into little boxes and say, you can do that, you can do that, you can't do this, because of some simple characteristic about what people are. And that, of course, applies to gender, it applies to race, it applies to disability, and all of the other protected characteristics as well. So in much the same way as we should guard against being racist or sexist or discriminatory for any of those reasons, we should do so as far as age is concerned as well. And that's really important, because when we fail to do that, we often eliminate or discount the possibility of using people, deploying them in an effective and good way, getting the best out of the potential workforce, maybe not even recruiting from the best pool of talent and ability that we need to recruit from for certain jobs and so on, because we really allowed these assumptions and stereotypes to get in the way. So I think it's in everybody's interest, really, that we just examine the way that we do these things, go about drawing conclusions, making assumptions and so on, and do so in the interest not only of the individual, who obviously has got a right to be treated fairly, but also in the interests of good business and good practice, and the most efficient and productive companies and organizations that we can possibly create.
Yeah, picking up on your point there, over the last few years, I've ended up sort of writing guides on all of the protected, or being at least involved in the sort of writing and research of guides on all the protected characteristics. And this is only a personal view, but I have come to the conclusion that sort of age is sort of, it's not forgotten, but it's kind of not taken as seriously as the other protected characteristics. And I regularly hear people sort of, it's like you say, they do it without thinking, whether it's just laziness or they just don't think, or because there's not so much emotion charged to things like obviously sex discrimination and all this material we've had about preventing sexual harassment at work. Racism is very high profile, but as these other ones have gained in profile, sort of age somehow seems to have got left behind. So I think it's become very important to raise the profile of age. And like today in passing, I just heard somebody say, and I wouldn't have expected this person to say it at all. They said, oh, that's because of the generation they come from. And I was sort of thinking, I need to sort of like tap you on the shoulder and say, do you realize what you just said? You wouldn't have said that if it was said, oh, it's because they're a man or they're a woman. You wouldn't have said that. Or you wouldn't have said it if it's because they were of a particular race. Yeah. And yet it's sort of, it's not necessarily that it's become acceptable, but it's not sort of, I suppose what I've said already, it's not treated as seriously, and I think that needs to change.
Yeah, I think we have to inject a degree of common sense into all of this. I mean, we don't want to become, or appear to be, excessively politically correct about the rules and the regulations and the advice that we give and so forth. This isn't about political correctness. It's about treating people with respect on one hand, but also not getting in the way of good communication, because communication is really important. And I think stereotypes and language, if sloppily used, it can really get in the way of good communication. It undermines trust, it hurts people's feelings, or it can do. As I said before, one person's banter can be another person's insult, So I think that all of that kind of thing really needs to simply be borne in mind.
Yeah.
And then, when we're thinking about the words we use, the way we treat people, and really going out of our way to ensure that we're doing ourselves and themselves the best possible service that we can, perhaps the kind of language that we use ceases to be so all important because it's the underlying motives and attitudes and so on that they're conveying. So I wouldn't want to say that we should never, ever, ever have a joke about somebody because of their age. But I think so often those ageist jokes really aren't very funny, and they do cause offence. So let's be careful about it. And probably the best rule is to avoid them if you're not really 100% on how they're going to go down.
And I think it's like you've already said, it's not how the person sort of making the banter or the joke sees what they've said. It's how the victim or the person they're aimed at perceives them, and as to whether they're upset by them or not.
Yeah.
And I think the only other thing I'd add is that it's careful that people, well, they are careful in what they say and the meaning behind it, whether they are sort of like, they have got stereotypes in their head, because otherwise if one person says it, another person can think, oh, that's okay, you know, they're saying it, and it can start to catch on and just become a habit. Just to sort of help with the person about their question as well, perhaps we should talk about the most problem area in the workplace. Okay, we've explained how age discrimination can happen, but do you think that it's in hiring of staff that this kind of problem can be the most sort of apparent?
Well, I think undoubtedly that's the potentially most damaging problem. And I think arguably discrimination in recruitment is the most pervasive problem. If you talk to employers or hirers, people who are hiring others for jobs, and if you can get below the surface, you often find that actually, far from age being absent in their consideration, it's really very important. And the number of employers, recruiters, hirers that try to find out how old an individual is, I think that's probably pretty commonplace, really. I've spoken to recruiters who said that far from age being absent, it's one of the first things that they try to, one of the first questions that they're being asked. So, you know, it's ridiculous, really, that, okay, we can no longer have advertisements, or at least we shouldn't have advertisements that advertise for a certain specific age range, but actually there's a kind of behind the hands secrecy about this, and that in the mind of the person who is hiring an individual for a job, there is very often a kind of ballpark target. You know, this is the kind of age that we would like this person to be. And often it's just a bit younger than me, or maybe 10 years younger than the person who's doing the hiring.
Or like me.
Or maybe like you, you know, but I mean, not often perhaps a bit younger, because it puts you in a more secure position. The hirer owner feels more comfortable perhaps bossing somebody around. I mean, really, most of this is utterly irrelevant. I spoke to a guy today who was, it turned out, 64, working in an IT company, a very, very well-known, high-profile IT company where predominantly young people were working. And he was very happy there and liked the work he was doing. And he did say to me, you know, but I'm often asked when I'm going to retire, and I actually don't want to retire. So that's moving away from recruitment, I suspect. But we, in TAME, the Age and Employment Network, which I used to be the chief executive of, we ran a number of surveys of older job seekers to try and find out what the experience was of older people who were looking for work. And we found that they believed that pretty well all, a very high proportion of them, about 80% of them, felt that it was more difficult to find work because they were over 50. Maybe over 50, over 55. Ask anybody who is looking for a job who's over 55 and they'll probably tell you, well, age is against you now. get to that sort of age. So that's the perception of individuals. It may not be true, but there's also been objective research that's been done by various researchers who have sent off dummy applications, duplicate applications with very similar, comparable experience and so on of individuals, and they find in those sorts of surveys or those sorts of research exercises that, generally speaking, the individual who is older with identical qualifications and very comparable background and so forth is much less likely to be shortlisted for the job. So there's quite a lot of evidence there that suggests that age discrimination is pretty widespread in recruitment. So I would say to that, if you are a company that wants to use the best talent pool that is available to you, as well as, of course, complying with the law, you should try to do everything you possibly can to avoid age discrimination, not just at the level of the HR department, but in the minds of the individuals who are actually doing the hiring, the line managers, who will probably be in there in the interview and may well be exercising a very important casting vote, or certainly be involved in taking the decision about who to hire and so forth.
Because the Acas line on this is that age really, apart from in very, very limited circumstances, is irrelevant in whether somebody should be hired or not. There are cases where it can be an occupational requirement in law to be a particular age or not be a particular age, but those are fairly rare, they're fairly limited. So as a sort of general rule, an employer should approach recruitment without any bias or preconceptions concerning age. And that's through the whole process, through sort of working out the type of requirements the person needs to be able to do the job, through to advertising it. Because you were sort of telling me earlier you'd seen an advert today or the other day where somebody was actually, who you'd expect them not to do this, they were actually advertising for a young man.
Indeed. Yeah.
So, not only were they being ageist, they were being sexist as well.
Yeah, it seems very old-fashioned, actually. It should appear, an advert should appear job for a young man, almost Victorian, really, now by today's standards. Who doesn't know that is both ageist and sexist?
But it still happens, and it happens far more often than you think it could.
Yeah.
And in terms of recruitment, it sort of carries on in terms of when you're sifting applications and not sifting out the applications for people. I don't want anybody over 50, or I don't want any millennials. So it needs to be made clear as well is that age discrimination, as we said earlier, is not just about preventing unfair treatment about older people. It's about preventing unfair treatment against younger people as well, or anybody in between, being untreated unfairly just because they're a different age to somebody else.
And we've got to be careful about indirect discrimination as well.
Yes.
I don't know whether you've said much about that in your guide.
Yes, we have, which does get to be quite a technical area, but that's where one, say an age group or people within a certain age range can be sort of treated unfairly, usually completely unintentionally, because of the way that sort of an organisation or company's policy or rules, whether they're written down or not, are put into practice. So yes, you can get a whole age group that sort of feel they're getting a raw deal. Yeah,
well, asking for certain educational requirements in terms of a particular qualification, for example, might be a good example of that kind of thing. Where it's unreasonable to expect that somebody is going to have, let's say, an international baccalaureate qualification if they left university 10, 15 years ago, or school, college, whatever it may be, when those sorts of qualifications are not widely available. or more to the point, probably more relevantly, talking in terms of GCSEs and not recognising the role that O-levels used to play.
Yes.
I myself obtained O-levels at school. Immediately sort of says something about how old you are. I think that's yeah.
Yeah, so an employer does need to be careful in asking for a specific qualification. It needs to give applicants the option of being able to sort of prove the skills, knowledge required in another way. It might be through a comparable qualification. It might be through the experience they've gained from doing the job elsewhere. So an employer can ask for a specific qualification, but if it's going to do so, it needs to be confident that it can actually sort of prove the requirement for that in law. I don't want to start getting too technical, but that starts to be coming down to be a legitimate aim.
Yeah, have a bit of wiggle room, I guess.
That's right.
Thing, you know, or equivalent.
We've got a question coming through, so we might as well.
Let's deal with that. Yeah, that's good.
So this one is, can employers dismiss contracted employees, so I think that just means an employee, via informal meetings during probationary period and denying union representation?
Well,
right, well, there's a few strands there. So in terms of an informal meeting, no, really, because if an employer is going to dismiss somebody, it's going to need to go through a proper and fair process, and that it might start with an informal meeting where employer and employee might meet, and there might be a problem and they discuss it informally. But if it's going to get to the extent where it's going to be a dismissal, then that needs to be a formal procedure.
Yeah. Well, look, everybody works under a contract of employment. That's the first thing. So whatever you do, you've got to try to deal with matters according to your contract of employment. I give them the right. Secondly, everybody's got certain rights in law, statute law. Thirdly, there's the whole question of what's good practice. What's a good and fair way to deal with things, as far as you're concerned as an employer. Obviously, it's good practice to give people an opportunity to be heard and listen to the reasons why you're reaching a decision or may reach a decision to dismiss them. If it's a disciplinary matter, then I would say you should protect yourself by using the disciplinary procedure, irrespective of how long the individual has been working for you. As for the question of union representation, obviously it's good practice to allow an individual to be represented, whether it's by a union or whether it's by simply an employee representative. And
I think you've already touched on this, but even during the probationary period, all right, the probation might say that they can part company on 1 week's notice. But even then, I think the employee should be, if there's a problem, the problem should be addressed and they should be given a chance to improve. So otherwise, the sort of reason for being dismissed can be called into question.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got a probationary period, you've got it there for a reason. You've got to try somebody out in the job. You've got to find out how suitable they are and so forth. And for most employers, most of the time, that's going to give you a lot of protection in terms of dealing with an employee that you don't think is suitable. You've given the individual the time to sort of try themselves out in the job. You've got reasons to believe that that person really isn't going to cut the mustard. Best thing to do is to call that person in, have a discussion with them, explain why you think they're not going to succeed in the job. Give them the chance, obviously, to have somebody along with them. But in the main, if you're dismissing somebody for a genuine reason of lack of capability during a probationary period, you haven't got anything to worry about. And all this business about why could you, doing it without a union representative or not is a bit of a red herring, you know. Having the union representative there or the employee representative is going to give you even more protection, because you've shown that you've acknowledged the individual's employment rights in every conceivable way. It's probably provided for within the disciplinary procedure or within the internal procedures as well. So, you know, you may or may not fail to convince an employment tribunal that you've dealt with that individual fairly, but why run the risk, you know?
Yeah. I think if the employer gives that employee a fair and reasonable chance to address where they're going wrong, then they'll be okay. Because if they give them all, you know, a reasonable chance to improve, and they don't improve, and they've given them those reasonable opportunities, then the employer can consider dismissing them.
Yeah, I think really at the end of the day, it's a question of being reasonable to people, being decent, treating people decently, following the procedures that you've got in place that you've put there specifically to deal with these sorts of problems, being confident about it, and being sensible so that at the end of the day, nobody can criticize you for failing to do something that quite obviously should have been done to give an individual a fair crack of the whip. So there could be all sorts of reasons why an individual, for example, during a probationary period, hasn't done terribly well.
Yes.
And, you know, that reason might emerge during the course of a discussion. It may be, for example, that the individual could say, well, actually, I've got a disability which I didn't really want to make a big thing about. And I couldn't do the job terribly well. So those sorts of things can come out in that kind of discussion. And rather than waiting until it gets into an employment tribunal where somebody says, well, I was dismissed unfairly because actually the reason I couldn't do the job as well as I should have, I was expected to do, was because of this reason. So I'd say in all circumstances, the best policy is to be as open as you possibly can, bend over backwards to be fair in that way and giving the individual a fair hearing. It doesn't mean at the end of the day that you can't dismiss them, but you may reach a decision to continue to employ them, and perhaps you'll have a very good employee that you'll be delighted that you've kept as a result of going through that sort of process.
I think the only other thing I should add about that question, it was quite open.
Yeah.
in that it could even have been a case where somebody's, you know, it's gross misconduct. So that's a completely different scenario.
Of course, yes, yeah. We didn't cover that. Yes.
No, I don't think.
Yeah.
You know, that's not really about age discrimination,
well, anyway,
is it?
we move on.
Yes. So we're also getting a question in about whether any other particular areas in the workplace where age discrimination is more likely to happen. And from the work I did in sort of compiling the guidance, the new guidance on age discrimination for Acas, I think there's quite a few, and they include, you know, deciding who gets trained and promoted.
I think that would be pretty typical, yes.
Yeah.
Quite common anyway, yeah.
There's also, well, shall we stick with that one for the moment?
Yeah, some employers think, I've heard it said, there's no point in pushing this older individual into a course, like a training course, because he's not going to be with us that much longer. You know, he's approaching retirement, and why would we want to be spending good money on that?
I think sometimes I've heard that said about younger people as well, in that, you know, younger people, well, they never stay very long. You know, they'll be gone in 2 years. But so it can apply to that end as well. But sorry.
Yes, no. Well, absolutely, you can do that. The stickability of older people in jobs is much more likely to be greater than a younger person. As a matter of fact, that doesn't mean to say that the younger person should be less likely to be offered training.
Indeed.
I think it's a good investment at all times, but in pleading the case for older people to be encouraged and offered training, I would just point out that actually the likelihood of them being around in 3, 4, 5 years' time to show the benefit of their training, to use it and apply it in the job, is equally good as a younger person who may very well move on to another job because they've got a career to think of and so forth. So it's a bit short-sighted, really, to withhold training for somebody because they're a little bit older for that reason.
I've also heard an interesting train of thought in that as sort of the shelf life of training lasts less these days. This is because sort of technology and change seems to sort of move on in the workplace ever faster. So this idea that it's not worthwhile training somebody because they're not going to be around for long, that really doesn't hold much water anymore, because the need to keep on training people fairly regularly seems to be the case now, because technology change, the ways of working change, so people need to be updated fairly frequently.
Yeah.
So not that anybody should consider not training somebody because of their age. That's completely unacceptable. They should probably find that training people, no matter what their age, would benefit both them and the organisation as well.
Yeah, and organisations are interested in quality, and they're interested in productivity, and they're interested in performance. And people of any age can learn. This whole idea that you can't teach an old dog new tricks is terribly old hat. But in terms of performance, there have been various pieces of research which have shown that it's not really true that performance falls off as people get older. There may be certain types of jobs where people are operating really at the frontier of their physical capability, and there aren't that many jobs where people are doing that. But for most people, most of the time, they're working within their physical capacity. So that's important. But failing to give a certain group of people training because of their age is going to be quite likely to mean that actually their productivity or their performance, their speed of operation and so on, is more likely to fall off.
Yeah.
So I know that BT did some comparison between engineers who had, they gave the older engineers training, and they found that their performance was just as good as the younger engineers, whereas it had been assumed that actually performance is going to fall off with age. So, it's a good case, I think, for making sure that everybody believes that they have the right to training, is offered the right to training, is encouraged to train, and learn about the job, take an active interest and so forth, and feel properly part of the work community, and isn't sort of gliding down onto some sort of pathway of soft landing pathway just because they're approaching a nominal age that could be their retirement age.
And I think it's also been found that people will respond to training no matter what their age, as long as they get the same training. So somebody who's older gets the same training as somebody who's younger. And it's not sort of thought that, well, somebody who's sort of in their 50s or 60s won't respond to the technology as well, so we won't train them to the same depth. I think it's been found that they will respond as long as they're given good quality training and given the chance to use it, put it into practice.
Yeah, I think there is a case in terms of IT, when some people say to me, well, we think that it might be more sensible to train older people in IT sessions so that they're all together, because they complain that the younger people are so much quicker, they've grown up with a great familiarity with IT and so forth. They feel a bit foolish when they're being trained in a group with a lot of younger people, and they're fumbling away, and they're all thumbs on the keyboard and so forth. I'm not 100% convinced that that's always necessary. I think that there could be horses for courses there, but if you do have individuals who feel, you know, maybe they need some sort of booster rocket behind them, some additional support in order to get to a specific level of competence, be prepared to do that. I've also come across cases where older people felt that they needed a bit longer than some of the younger people to train on a particular new IT package. I came across that recently in a finance company. Excuse me. So I think giving people a bit more time to learn is wise from that point of view.
Because I suppose after all, you know, people can. We're all individuals, and none of us are the same, irregardless, you know, irrespective of age. So, you know, we all have different strengths and weaknesses. So sometimes those need to be looked after.
Yeah, exactly.
We've had got another question, and I'm delighted to see this one. It's saying, as an employer, what will be one of the best things I could do to prevent age discrimination at work? Well, I'm going to seize this opportunity, and I'm going to say, give yourself time to read the new Acas guide on age discrimination. It's called Age Discrimination Key Points for the Workplace, and you can find it online at www.acas.org.uk/age discrimination. It's already proving popular so far, and it was only just launched over a week ago. We've had on the new web page that is the sort of hosting the guidance, it's already been visited more than 15,000 times, and that's just over a week. So it's proving popular, and we're very pleased with that. You'll find that it's practical. We've tried to keep the guide as short as possible and keep it as simple as possible. It can get a bit technical in places. We will try not to make it technical, understand that, because the laws around age discrimination can be quite involved, but we try to make it simple. So please take a look. We think you'll find it helpful, and we've had some good feedback already. So just to move on, I think we've got something else coming here. Right, I think we've already touched on this really, Chris, but I don't know if you want to say any more about it. This is an employer saying, what is the next step I should take after reading the guide? Well,
it leads on from the previous question, doesn't it, really? What's the best thing I could do? Obviously, read the guide, think about the policies that you've got. I think very important, make sure that everybody who is in a position of any kind of managerial authority, but actually everybody in the organisation, understands what the rules are, what the expectations are in terms of all kinds of discrimination and fair treatment, and just talk about those sorts of things and have it written up somewhere quite clearly. You know, this is the policy of this organisation, and I think do some practical things to put that into operation. Show by the people that you hire, by the people that you use, and so on, that you are an age diverse organisation, or a diverse organisation, including across age. You may be too small an organisation to do anything very well thought out and planned, big deal sort of thing. But bigger organisations, obviously, they can decide to have some sort of programme to ensure that the age diversity policy is wheeled out. They can ensure that it's something that is consulted about. They can ensure that if they're adopting a policy, that it's something that the managers at all level understand. They can think in terms of training. There might be a need for that. Always a good idea if you've got a new policy to think about who are the people that are going to be using it. But I think very importantly, don't just adopt the policy, talk about the policy before it's been adopted. That's a really valuable opportunity to raise people's understanding and awareness. Get the employees involved. maybe even have
and trade unions
age
too.
champions in some organisations. They can do a good job, but simply having somebody at a good level inside the organisation who is welcomed and recognised at whatever age, young and older people, all of those sorts of things can play a useful part.
I think the main choice for me would be, and you've already touched on this, and I think this is something a small firm could do as well, excuse me, is to avoid stereotyping because of age. Because from what I've found in sort of compiling the guidance, it is one of the most common causes of age discrimination. And that also taps into what you were talking about earlier, about unconscious bias and understanding what that is and not falling into that trap. And if it helps, Acas also has guidance as well on understanding what unconscious bias is, and you can find that at www.acas.org.uk/unconscious bias. And that will help you to stop stereotyping. And ways you can do it include judging people on their job performance or the quality of their job application, not assumptions about them of what their capabilities or their attitudes or their likely behaviours or their interests because of their age. And also encouraging people of different age groups to work together, because that way they sort of get better understanding of themselves as individuals, and any sort of typical thinking they've got can start to ebb away. We've got another question come in. Actually, I think what would be a good idea is that we found, we sort of came up with some myths that are quite common amongst people. And perhaps we could sort of, you might like to talk about some of these. One of them is that older staff are more likely to be off work ill.
Well, I think the evidence there is that older staff don't have any more time off because are not off, absent more frequently than younger people. If there is a difference, it may well be that older people, if they're ill, they are likely to be more seriously ill or may require more time off in order to recover, whereas younger people maybe take time off more frequently. So shorter periods of illness perhaps, but more frequently so, whereas the older person more likely to not have time off, maybe goes through a whole history of employment with rarely taking time off, but then might need to take time off because they got something a bit more serious. So that would be the main difference, I think, between the two age groups.
Yeah, I looked at some information from the National Office for Statistics, which was published only last July. And what it sort of showed is that the different age groups can be prone to different ailments or conditions. But when you sort of look at it all, over sort of age ranges, it all seems to sort of level itself out.
Yeah.
I found that quite surprising, actually, but it gets quite complicated when you look at all the information. People can go on to the National Office for Statistics site and see for themselves. But I did find that interesting.
Yeah.
We had another one, is that basically this is a myth. It's okay for an organisation with a staff all of the same age group, so that's the same age group, to insist on hiring only people of that age range, so they are what the employer calls the right fit for the culture of the organisation.
Well, some organisations do seem to do this, and talk in terms of the culture. And if you look at certain sectors, it's pretty clear that they favour, directly or indirectly, intentionally or unintentionally, people of a certain age. Youth let's face it, has often been seen to be a very favourable attribute. And of course, there are many things about being young and having young people around which are extremely positive, extremely good, and it's a great idea to, of course, support the recruitment of young people inside an organisation. But to be so monolithically skewed towards one particular direction, age or generation, I think is not a great idea. A more positive thing to do is really to try to ensure that, as far as possible, you have an age balance in an organisation. That's sensible, because obviously if you can do that, then you're going to get some kind of transfer of knowledge and skills from one person to another, useful practices and so forth that come with experience. And there's the famous piece of research that was conducted by the University of Lancaster in conjunction with McDonald's, where some researchers went round to different McDonald's restaurants and they interviewed customers and tried to find out as much as they could about how satisfactory they found the experience. And what they discovered was that in those restaurants where there was a more balanced workforce, where there were a few older people, as well as the younger people that have been employed there, perhaps more likely to be associated with McDonald's. In those restaurants where it was a bit more of a mix, there were some older people there, customers themselves were more satisfied with the results. They found that the atmosphere was good. Young kids were coming into the organisation, and if there was somebody a little bit older, perhaps as old as grandma might have been, then somehow or other there was something about the aura in the atmosphere that made it a better experience for the customers. So I think that's another important aspect of this, that if you really are dealing with an organisation that is meeting the general public are going to be all ages, and they won't necessarily want to see people that are all of one age inside the organisation. So having an age mix is by far a better idea. And indeed, some banks now are going out of their way to ensure that they encourage recruitment of older people as counter staff, for example, so that when somebody who is older comes in and asks for help, then they'll see some older people across the counter and maybe find it less intimidating, be happier to talk to them perhaps about some slightly awkward problem that they've got that they might not have been too happy sharing with a very young person, whatever it might be, whether it's I've lost my credit card, or I don't know how to do internet banking, or whatever else it might be.
And what I'd sort of suggest, say, to anybody who is applying for a job and they get told that you're not the right fit for our culture, to actually sort of challenge the person who's saying this and say, well, can you explain what you mean? To find out whether there is a justifiable reason for them saying that, and there may well be, or whether it's just a way of them disguising that they're really being discriminatory towards you. So be prepared to challenge.
Yeah. Can I just say a couple of words here about the sort of broader approach to this? I think that we've concentrated very, very strongly on anti-discrimination and complying with the law. In the research that we've been doing at Newcastle University, we've been looking at age in a somewhat broader way. In one project that I'm involved with at the present time, the Aspire project. The Aspire, by the way, stands for Active Aging Through Social Partnership and Industrial Relations in Europe. And this is a European project in which we're collaborating with a number of other European universities. We've been looking at the sorts of policies and practices that the organization introduces to ensure that age is managed as a management concept, something, and that policies, practices are put into place that ensure that the aging workforce, actually the workforce full stop, but in particular older people in the workforce who have got some talents, might be in danger of not being able to remain in the workforce for too much longer, are in some ways challenged, but also in other ways extremely useful to the organisation, can be encouraged to remain longer. And of course, with the demographic change that we've got, with the shrinkage of the workforce in some areas, certainly a decline in birth rates and so on, this is becoming an extremely important area.
Very much
and
so.
We're finding that if you look at different countries, this whole idea of age management, adopting good policies, sensitively chosen, in order to maximize the potential of the aging workforce, has become extremely important. And what we've also found is that doing that in a way that ensures the buy-in of the employees is extremely important. So doing it in a social partnership sort of way is really crucial. What we're doing in the Aspire project is producing an online guide and also a training package that we would like to take out to employers and hopefully maybe use in collaboration with Acas or anyone else who's interested, to show some of these best practices in age management and active aging. So I just thought I'd slip that one in as a free commercial, if I may. I hope you don't mind me doing
not
that.
At all,
but we'd be very pleased to hear from you if you want to get in touch with us, either through my email, christopher.ball@newcastle.ac.uk, or look at the CROW website, agediversity.com.
Well, on this subject of managing age, of course, you're doing it kind of like Europe-wide, but in Britain, it's basically meaning because of the sort of low birth rate, there's going to be fewer young people coming into the workforce. I think it means that within 3 years, there'll be something like about, if I'm getting these figures right, something like about 700,000 fewer young people, well, people between the ages of 16 and 49. We're actually coming now, sorry, I'm going to have to leave that there. But I think Chris covered it well enough because we're getting towards the end of the session. So perhaps we could sort of help with some sort of next steps. If you're an employee and you're experiencing discrimination at work, you should consider speaking to somebody who can help you. And depending on your circumstances, that might include your manager, or you could go to your employer's HR department, or your organization might have an equality champion who can help you. And if you're a member of a trade union, you can go and see your trade union rep. If you're an employer, you might want to sort of chip in here, Chris, because you might have some different ideas to me. Sort of one of my suggestions would be to sort of look at how you recruit new staff and check if there's anything that you may need to change so you don't discriminate. Is there any sort of one that you would like to chip in?
No, I think if you follow the Acas guide, you're going to be getting most things right.
Thank you.
But you need to be careful and think in a broader way if you possibly can, so that you're looking at age and the impact on your organisation. So I think being more age management in your thinking, doing, for example, skills and age audits in your organisation, thinking about what is the impact in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, if we roll it forward, of the kind of changes that are likely to take place in our workforce. What do we need to put into place? All of that sort of stuff is extremely important as well. So I would say it's not just about not discriminating, it's about being age positive and very, very age management minded in the way that you approach it.
I think all I chip in as number 3 is make sure your staff, including your managers, understand what age discrimination is. because if they understand it, there's a better chance that it won't happen. So just to sum up further, if you want to connect with us further on social media, you can do so on Twitter at Acas.org.uk and LinkedIn at Acas.org.uk. And you can get more information about preventing age discrimination at work there. I've already told you a couple of times where you can find the new guidance. If you'd like to know more about dealing with other problems in the workplace, please go to the Acas website, www.acas.org.uk. If you need help with other discrimination matters, such as not in the workplace, but sort of getting goods and services, go to the Equality Advisory and Support Service on www.equalityadvisoryservice.com. So thank you very much for joining us. That's it from Chris and myself. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Yeah, bye.